Welcome to the Climate Hour. I'm your host, Bob Grove. Today, we're going to talk about the international youth climate movement. Young people across the world are forming networks to take positive action on climate change. Many act locally, but increasing numbers are coming together to form national and continental coalitions that act collectively to empower and mobilize a generational movement of young people. Many of these coalitions, groups like the European Youth Climate Movement, African Youth Initiative on Climate Change, Project Survival Pacific, South American Youth Climate Coalition, Arab Youth Climate Movement, China Youth Climate Action Network, Eco Singapore, and groups like the Energy Action Coalition and Sustain Us in the United States. These groups are recognized by the United Nations and actively participate in worldwide negotiations through the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. But even on a smaller scale, young people know that they will bear the brunt of climate change, and they're taking to the streets, to public forums, and to political office to create climate action. We're joined today on Zoom by David Bernhardt, climate activist, international relations student at the University of Erfurt in Thüringia, Germany, and student coordinator of Heartland's Future Bus Tour. Hi, David.
Hi, thank you for having us.
Katharina Herz, an English and communication student at the University of Erfurt. Hi, Katharina.
Hi, glad to be here.
And Svea Bennett, a student of literature at the University of Erfurt. Hi, Svea.
Hi, hello.
And David, let's start with you. Germany and climate change. What is Germany's position on this, and what are you seeing happening with the youth movement in Germany?
I feel Germany has always been very active or at the forefront of the fight against climate change. Right, arguably the climate movement began in the United States. The consciousness for our planet was kind of originated maybe in the 60s with the Apollo missions, right, after Apollo 8, and we first saw our planet. But very soon after that, with the movement of the 60s and the 70s, climate action came to Germany, and a consciousness of thinking about our planet in a different way came to Germany as well. So we've been at the forefront. We are obviously, generally, if you hear the word Germany or like just think of Germany and climate, Germany seems that it is very, very, very active, very, very progressive. I'm happy to talk about all the details. Is that really true or not? But I feel like Germany has, at least in the broad consciousness of our country, climate is something we often discuss, that we discuss even more nowadays. It's very, very, it's swept into the youth, and youth movements have come up all over the place in the last couple of years. But I think it's always our parents' generation. It's always been a thing. It's always been something that we basically grew up with, right? It's been a constant thing. We were educated about it in school. And now for the first time in the last 10 years, really, but maybe in the last 5 years, where we really think about this ourselves, now being university students, being young adults, looking out to the world, we see the consequences and the effects taking shape in the real world, and as well as in Germany as well, of course.
And Katharina, David's talking about your parents, that generation that was already aware and active. How has that informed the climate movement in Germany, the youth climate movement specifically?
I think there's a lot to build on, definitely. But always, of course, it depends on which group in Germany you are talking about. For example, my parents are farmers. They were never involved in any sort of climate movement. So it depends on where you are at in Germany. But I do think that in every village, in every town, there have been Vereine. That's a very German culture thing. What is that? A club?
Like
Local clubs, community clubs that care for the environment of the village, and these have now been reinvigorated, I think, with wider youth climate movement as well. And these things are coming together and forming coalitions and working on building on what is already there and adding another sense of urgency on top of it, I think.
Now, Svea, the climate activism, what Katharina was talking about, the youth activism, how do you see that? Have you seen that change in the past few decades?
Definitely. In the past few years, it's really got an identity, especially with Greta Thunberg showing up on the all-white national news. There are definitely also other young people that are becoming leaders or were leaders of this community, this organization for a couple of years. But of course, somehow Greta Thunberg got like with her hunger strike, got like to be the face of this group all over Europe. And I mean, she came to America, to the US especially, and spoke to a lot of political people, and with her becoming a face of it and Fridays Future becoming a more seen movement and the organization throughout Germany and especially all over Europe, the young generation definitely, and not only the young generation, I mean, a lot of people of different age groups are joining her and her movement. It became quite more obvious. And as we are looking on the young generation and them being really into this topic and are active in this community and talking to each other, even in private rooms about it, I also think that the young generation really influenced how we maybe see also our study fields. So like get a quite bigger view on things. We look maybe at urbanistic studies, agricultural studies as well, or architecture. There are a lot of young people now that have been influenced by like climate change and the effects, and especially by the young generation and the movement. And that definitely influences also how we see study fields and how to improve them, as like especially architecture. There are new projects, new ways to think about how we can live and how we can afford sustainable lifestyles and rebuilding cities. When the young people and the young generation especially becomes involved in the climate change, it has effects on how we see it and how it gets into like our daily life and the development of our countries. Neither we in Germany or in the US really has an effect on our parents' generation. I mean, they're like our teachers basically, and with them also getting a quite better perspective on climate change and interacting with the young people, I think it's maybe something that's not differentiated by age groups, but we are like getting together even more.
Yeah, but I think it's also important to say that we are speaking as climate activists, so we are in a certain bubble, yes, and the people around us are also in a certain bubble, so we cannot really speak for the whole the whole of Germany. And we do have, I mean, the two backbones of our industry, which as Germans we're culturally quite proud of, I think, is coal and the car industry. Are working a little bit of a tightrope between those two extremes, I think.
I think the youth climate movements have come from the fringes into a more mainstream view, basically. Yeah. Within the general public and among us ourselves as well, right? Yeah. Among us, I feel like maybe growing up, my parents were very maybe active in that scene, but other friends were always like, "What climate change? Who cares about that?" I think generally the young people didn't really think about it too much, or we're not really involved in it too much. But now, it's not about being fashionable. It's not about being a part of a trend or a movement or kind of a community or something like that. It's really about our future, and I think that's what's become more clearly visible in Germany. That again, what you mentioned is a generational thing. It started obviously from like several smaller organizations and communities, but has become a really national and now international movement. And I mean, the pandemic has slowed it down a little, but you can see it coming back. And the March for Climate and things you've seen in the United States as well, right, have been taking place in Germany as well. And Svea just mentioned Fridays for Future. It's probably the most active group that I've also been involved in within Germany, in Europe maybe as well. And they've started originally from Fridays for Future, as in having the Fridays of a school day or school week off and going, like basically leaving school, even though they were required to go to school, to then protest for the climate. That has morphed since then into a more serious, more very, very well organized structure that organizes events, talks, has maybe like published books, people go on to talk shows. So there's a whole different like substantial movement behind that at this point. Again, moving from smaller organizations within the last, the last 10 years, but really maybe the last 6 years or something like that. It was, well, yeah.
Yeah.
And the
I think-
Fridays for Future, that's spun off of Greta Thunberg's action, correct?
Yeah, that's she's been the face of it. She's not necessarily
Yes.
been the main organizer, but she's been the most public figure in that movement.
Yeah,
yes.
and uniting also all of the different movements we've had. I mean, we've had a lot of dispersed local movements, though I think now it's like a lot more international, inter-European as well. And I think in general, maybe we can say that like climate commitment to taking action against climate change is more of a social norm now.
Yeah,
than it
that's a
was
good way of
before.
describing it. Yeah.
Mhm. So the Fridays for Future, you've all taken action in that. What does that look like for you personally? Are you skipping classes on Friday or what?
So me taking place in it, well, I got involved with it after school, but originally it came from that thought of school children skipping school to make a statement. But since then, I think it's relatively early. It morphed into more of a, again, as like I said, a serious climate movement. I don't know if I think we all have been involved in it in a way because our university, not obviously our university itself, but the students at our university have been organizing things there, and it's been at this point the biggest climate marches, if it's in Hamburg, Berlin, Frankfurt, or even Erfurt, the smaller town that we are from in Thüringia, the state above Bavaria. Even there, it's been the main organizer, the main group that actually plans out the big climate marches, right? If there's an international climate march, if there's an Earth Day event, something like that, it's always been intertwined with that organization. And so I feel like lots of my peers have been involved with it. I've been directly involved within Hamburg, my hometown in northern Germany. And yeah, it's always, again, the strength that it has is that it has the numbers and also the seriousness that we go to, or ultimately our goal is the legislative, talking to a legislature. And there are several positive things that this movement has already achieved in the last couple of years. We made ourselves heard, but not only that, for example, the Supreme Court in Germany decided based on a case involving this movement against the Federal Republic of Germany that the state of Germany has a responsibility to act on climate change, just as it has a responsibility to act on the security and safety on any other issue concerning its citizens, and in a way basically not forced, but maybe stated that climate change must be acted upon by the government. And that in turn basically led to a lot of commitments that have been made, like banning gasoline cars at a certain time, or at the sale at least within Germany, I think by 2035. And then being our ultimate goal, the big goal of being climate neutral within Germany as well. I believe that's 2045 or 2050. So that those things have become more serious and have actually found themselves into bills and have been passed within Germany. Obviously, those are goals. Those are not hard commitments. But I think like actions that the youth has made, the way that the youth has made themselves heard, have been heard on the other side with the people in power. And they like, okay, we hear you and we will act accordingly. Obviously, that is still an ongoing process and we cannot go home. We have to stay strong, obviously. This is why we're here. And this is why we're still doing this. And I think this never will be over. But I think there's a positive response between the people that we want to reach and the people that go out and are active in this movement.
Svea, your studies are in literature, and you earlier mentioned cultural and local approach to climate change. What does that look like?
Well, I really am a fan of like taking this local and more cultural approach, because for me it's a thing to like acknowledge people and what they have been doing and what their stories are and what they tell. So coming from literature, we also know the cultural approach when it comes to literature that is written in terms of identity and war crisis and people leaving their home and leaving things behind and entering new cultural things or cultural settings. But on the other hand, these narratives also tell their personal story. And while reading them, we acknowledge that these people have a certain story and that things happened, and also acknowledge the way they have done certain things, neither which culture they are referred to. And I think bringing this attempt to climate change is a really big thing because it unites us. While hearing about different stories and different cultural approaches on climate change and how people are already doing things against it more locally, you really offer them a place to be heard, and which I think is really important because it's not only that we need to talk to the government, it's not only that we need to talk to the companies. Most likely we need to start where the small people are. I mean, we all know, for example, from high school that we read history books, we know the great dates, we know the great events that happened, but most likely we don't look deeper into the history, into what the people went through and what their stories are. And with climate change, I somehow have the same feeling because I really think that people need a base for it, not only a part to like take an approach to the government, but also acknowledging what other people are already doing, what your neighbors are doing, and not only what you're doing, but what are your fears? What thoughts do you have when you think about climate change? What do you think about it when it runs up in the media, up and down, and you see all these events happening? You see the bad stuff and most likely the bad stuff. And what does this make with yourself? And I really think that is a needed approach to like take it local and get into discussions, offer space to talk about it and what people think about it. Because I really think that when it comes to climate change, we must unite and overcome cultural like differences. We need to come together, learn from each other, teach each other what can we already do. The agriculture people need maybe to like teach the food industry what can we do and how will that affect how food is produced, or other way around. And we all can affect each other and the way we are living. We also learned that while living together in a bus and like running around the Midwest, there are certain habits we bring into this room and certain habits our parents taught us or we learned by ourselves, routines. And with talking to each other, living next to each other, we really adapt how we do certain things, how we wash dishes, how we prepare food. Things maybe change also in the eating habits. So we've got vegetarian with us and it really looks delicious. And so you maybe like choose less meat. And I think this is on a really small basis, but putting it into a local or communal level, you really can see what's happening and how it changes society. People are being heard. You can go to someone with fears, but also new ideas spread out of it. And when these ideas get into startups or small shops and companies, it really can climb up the ladder and really help on people being involved into the topic and not being like, yeah, we're screaming and shouting and going to protests, but maybe not everything is heard. And it's not only up to the people sitting in the government, it's not only to the people sitting in the court. We also can do things without really having to change the law. And I think that's really great because that gives people something into their hands to do and not to be like, well, there's no answer, we're not hearing back from it, or it doesn't work. And I mean that really depends on where you look at. But all over, I really like this cultural experience because climate change is something that unites and not differentiates between cultural history or something like this. It really puts us all together as humans and not differentiate each other into groups.
Absolutely. I know we're experiencing a lot of weather disasters in the U.S. right now. I mean, obviously recent months, but just in the past few weeks, various states, floods, droughts, blizzards. What kind of stuff are you seeing in Germany? Is Germany and Europe in general, are they also seeing these kind of weather events?
So I think the biggest one was definitely the flooding of the Ahrtal a few years ago. And I mean, the people there couldn't really see it happening. And when the flooding happened and the disaster broke loose, you really could see the effects of it. And while seeing the effects, you could really see where the government failed to protect the city by natural environmental stuff. Like I think when I remember it correctly,
there should have been like a more protective forest to keep up all the water and not to like letting it flood into the Ahrtal itself. And that wasn't built up. And therefore, the communal people came together really strong, helped each other. There was nothing like, they all depended somehow on the financial help from the state, of course. But they really got together, those who remained in their homes and the homes that stood still after the flooding, helped people all over Germany, donated stuff there. And it really was becoming together, and especially thinking about how we can make things safer in case flooding happens again. And we really face these issues and in different ways, also like with fires in summer because of the outrageous heat. Sometimes there are bannings of open fireplaces, for example, and people still doing them. It's really like a thing where you see it gets down to yourself, and that you like need to act as a community.
Yeah, I think up until a few years ago, climate change was often thought as something that happens somewhere else, and that we were in the 70s, for example, you couldn't swim in a lot of our rivers because they were so polluted. Now they're all clean. We've done our bit. Everything is all right. And now I think this big flood was a big awakening, I think, for many people. But also every summer there's a new heat record, the hottest summer in this since the beginnings of the recordings. Or you hear everywhere about the groundwater drying up, for example. Now it's really something that we see here, that we, for example, I'm from Bavaria, there should be snow in the winter, there should be a lot of snow in the winter, there isn't anymore. So now we really can't deny the effects the climate change already has brought onto us. I think right now we're in climate awareness mode. I think we're still not really in the crisis mode as we are in other parts of the world. We're still privileged in that, but I think in Germany, it's now like we cannot deny it anymore.
Katharina, you mentioned earlier, I mean, Germany is kind of known for coal and cars and those big carbon things. And, you're also facing a crisis with the Ukrainian war, your oil and stuff being cut off from Russia. And I've just read you shut down your last 3 nuclear power plants. I mean, it seems like a lot's going on there. What do you see Germans, the youth movement in Germany, what do you see its role in the larger movement, EU generally? How does Germany take leadership there, or what are you doing?
Oftentimes, I honestly feel like Germany is very good at saying the right things on the political stage, having the right rhetoric, but not really following up on it. For example, we've had the talk of Energiewende, the revolution towards renewable energy since 2010. And now we have the situation in Ukraine and the war, and still relies so much on if we had taken action, as we said, in 2010, we would not be in this situation right now. In 2020, even a new coal plant the plans were approved, for example. All of these things don't really fit together with what we want to achieve. Even the Green Party has not followed up on a lot of its promises, and I think that's because we are culturally so entrenched in coal and in car. I mean, the car industry is 10% of our GDP, for example. So there are a lot of interests there, a lot of conflicting interests there that our politicians have to manage. The youth and that is something that I think is also one of the biggest issues that the youth climate movement sees in Germany, coal and cars at the moment. And that's like the 2 main focuses, I would say, because so much is connected to that.
And I think because of we have very ambitious climate goals, so they are there. And I think other countries not necessarily, there's still the step. We've already taken the first steps in the right direction. But we see, if you look at the Russian situation or the war in Ukraine right now, it has forced us to take those steps earlier. So it's obviously a situation that's a bit more complicated, but in general, it's forced us to be basically energy independent and say, hey, we need to be energy independent of Russia and maybe even other countries in the long term. So it's forced us to reinvest or look at our investment into wind energy, into offshore wind parks, into the general electric grid, right? The electric grid needs to be built up to support electric cars.
You're listening to the Climate Hour. I'm your host, Bob Grove. We're speaking with David Bernhardt, Svea Bennett, and Katharina Herz about the international youth climate movement. Obviously, our listeners and viewers within the United States, we see ourselves from inside, wondering how things look from the outside. David, what does the U.S. climate action look like from the outside, from your point of view?
In a way, I feel like some things, generally we view the US as it is on a statistical level, right? One of the biggest polluters, or one of the biggest countries that has one of the biggest CO2 emissions per capita and so on. But at the same time, I feel like when it comes to technology, we look to the US as an inspiration. When it comes to maybe the rigorous amount of spending in renewable energies. I'm thinking of the acts that were like recently in the last, or under the Biden administration, done. So the shift, I feel like, from specifically, if you look at industries, parts of populations, the shift from renewable, like fossil fuel industries to renewable industries, maybe even using those workers, and then to someone that has worked in a coal mine before could work as a solar installer, right? It's a very general statement there, but something like that, I feel like, is something we struggle in Germany with. And so we look to the United States for inspiration, by at the same time, obviously acknowledging that there are severe and grave and big things that are just different in the way we conduct our societies, or historically how our societies have developed. The car dependency in the United States, we're very much aware of that now, being here for almost a month. That's not as much the case in Germany, of course. So we do have just substantial differences that of course, influence the way we can deal and are dealing with climate. So I guess transportation will probably be the biggest, looking at the United States and seeing how impossible it is maybe to take a train to your next local city or something like that, but long distance trains, and just the sheer distance and the sheer the norms generally, maybe when it comes to housing, comes to heating and so on. So there's just like cultural norms that are embedded within Germany and embedded in the United States. And I think that's something that's very clear and very visible from the outside.
And is that, all three of you'd mentioned you're on a bus together. You're actually on this bus touring around the Midwest talking about climate, which, we'll explore more later. But has that changed your viewpoint on the US? Actually having been on the ground and talking to people, how's that changed it, Katharina?
I would say it has definitely changed for me. It was very interesting seeing to me. Back in Germany, I tried to go not zero waste, that is basically impossible, but low waste at least. And I thought, well, I'm pretty far already in that regard. I'm good at avoiding plastics at all costs, right? And if I go to another country, I can just continue doing so. But now I've seen here, just by existing, I haven't changed anything about what I want to achieve, what my norms are. But it's just really, really hard to go on to the same level of low plastic usage in another country. And I've really it really made me realize how much more difficult things are based on your location. And how easy we have it in some regards in Germany. You mentioned the transportation, the fact that even looking further than just cars and trains, even the fact that we can pretty much get anywhere in Europe without using a plane, all of these things, which these infrastructures are not here, of course. So I think it has given me a lot deeper understanding of where people are at globally as well. Yeah.
Svea, your opinion, how does the US look to you? How's it compared to the EU?
Well, seeing how things work here, it definitely is something different than looking from abroad to another country. In Germany, we normally rely on what the media tells, and what we see online. So really seeing how things really are is quite impressive, as well, and it really shows why we're doing what we're doing and the way we're doing it, in terms of the narrative, and coming back to why it is so important to like take the local approach, take the acknowledgement into climate change, because really seeing how things work here based on the infrastructure. I mean, how big the US are compared to like Germany. I mean, that would have been a lot amount of money to like make some proper transit, like from east to west coast, and without a plane usage. And even like smaller cities are like 1.5 to 2 hours distance by driving. I mean, really seeing this really makes us recognize somehow how difficult, climate activism can really be, and that it's not the fault of like one country just to be like, well, why you're not doing anything? Because we can't expect to like change countries just overnight. I mean, it takes a lot of time, even in Germany, as Katharina and David already mentioned. Some things really take up years over years, and that we can't change anything overnight. And seeing that in the US is really impressive, because normally it's like, yeah, well, now do something about that. And then you question yourself, yeah, well, how are they supposed to do something overnight or within a few years to like set up real usable public transit all over the country? And you can't go to America, or neither you can go to Germany and just tell people, yeah, leave your car behind, sell it, use something different. That's not possible. And that's definitely not appropriate for something. And really acknowledging that countries are the way they are, and that they have certain infrastructure, and that it is different, and that they have another starting point for climate activism and climate change and different issues. Really seeing that in person makes us sure like how we really need to listen to each other and to know in which situation people are. And when we do that, we can find another solution. But with like German standards in politics, for example, or in like the community of Fridays for Future going to the US probably, most people, I think, would be offended, and that is just the right, because some things won't adapt here that fast or quick as maybe in Europe, because there are structural differences.
And it's a lot bigger.
Yeah,
it's so much harder to implement these changes on such a big scale. I've definitely seen that, how privileged a life of like being climate conscious in Europe is. It's really, really easy. Compared, but I also feel like I feel more kinship now towards the US as well, because I think we are in similar situations still. I mean, you talked about the pollution that of course the US puts out. We are in the same. We are also one of the most polluting countries in the world, because we are also, just like the US, very industrialized and have a history of exploiting our natural resources according to our economic needs. Mm-hmm. So I think we are I do see a lot more similarities between Germany and the US than I did before coming here.
And we have to acknowledge, right, that when we do listen and we do come to communities, I feel like we've often surprised that I feel like, but going back to the view that maybe Germans have to the United States, we come here, and then, for example, in Nebraska, we visited essentially a central city in Nebraska, just an hour from 2 hours from Omaha, where they have multiple wind farms outside the city, as well as solar parks outside the city as well. We talked to a group of people in Bloomington, Illinois, the other day, and they have been building, or currently building, a solar park outside the city. And people have been walking up to us. Of course, we attract maybe a certain crowd of people that already are active in this field as well. But just saying, like, people that we met on the street as well, that we just invited to come to talk to the events that we went to so far. And they've been saying, oh, well, I have thought about this. I have an electric car. I've been astonished by how many people I've talked to have electric cars, how much the consciousness is there. The thinking is there to that they've implemented many like things that even in Germany would be rare or surprising. That someone has, is almost energy independent with their own home or is planning to do that, something like that. So I feel like the local efforts on the ground, right, the Climate Council in Kansas City. So there's like things that I feel like we are not aware of, and maybe we have certain stereotypes of the United States in certain ways in Germany. And then coming here, it's like, oh, wait a minute, these are the same humans that are they're like the same citizens, same concerned people that are doing the same things, in some cases much more. So it just might be just like the Svea and Kata just said, it is more difficult maybe to implement certain things here, but things are being implemented and things are being done, and they don't, right? Some cities don't require public transportation if people switch to electric cars and stuff like that, right? Different approaches are needed for different situations.
Yeah, it's definitely given me a lot of hope, and that was beautiful to see as well.
Yeah, and I think there's a big difference. I mean, Europe has this long history in this fixed land mass, and you guys utilize your land so well, generation after generation, preserving. And, you're just environmentally very conscious because you have a fixed amount of land.
Yeah.
America, we've got so much wasteland out there that we can just afford to walk off and leave a building, go build a new one. It's cheaper for us. And obviously not as good for the environment. Mm-hmm. So I feel like there's so much that we can learn from Germany and Europe in general, just in terms of your home technologies, your recycling technologies, your transportation. Not so much that moving to electric cars is great, but your inner city areas where you walk, and your mass transit and Eurostar getting you clear across the EU. There's a lot of things that we can learn from you. What do we have? What does the United States have? And you kind of touched on this, David, but expand a little bit more about what is it that we can export to the world, to the youth movement specifically? What do we have to share as Americans?
I think one huge well of knowledge is definitely in indigenous culture, because they have been stewards of the land for thousands and thousands of years, and the knowledge and the technologies that are there in how to live with their surroundings in a sustainable way. I think that is something that people are becoming more aware of in Germany as well, and something that people are interested in learning about. That is one thing. Of course, there are a lot of technological advances. I mean, America has been leading in that for a very long time. Maybe you want to add on that?
Yeah, I think but the question is, right, like basically what can young Americans maybe teach us or Germans on an international playing field? As Kata already pointed out, I feel like maybe the different mindset, not necessarily that there's especially technology, right, that's been shared, can be shared internationally really quickly, but maybe just the mindset, having an American perspective on climate change ultimately does make a difference. I feel like in a way, the German climate movement is successful, but in a way almost conservative. And by conservative, I don't mean maybe on a political spectrum, but conservative in the way that it's existed a long time. And there's certain ways to how to deal with things, of saying, okay, maybe, right, organizing a gathering, a protest to change the legislative way of thinking, or doing certain things. And maybe an American perspective of having a more open mind, being more open-minded to possibilities, especially to technology, maybe. I think Germans, again, this is a stereotype, but I think it's in a certain extent it is true. We are very hesitant of change, and change usually happens very slowly, but if it happens, and once the ball gets rolling, things do usually turn out the way we intend to. So I think this ball is already rolling in Germany. So that's why we are where we are currently at with what we're doing, and all sorts of things when it comes to basically preventing more CO2 from entering the atmosphere. But if we add an American perspective, and especially a young American perspective to that, the flexibility, right? Specifically when I say, okay, the flexibility in that American perspective is something that I feel like is needed or can be very beneficial on an international stage, specifically within the youth movement, and how we go forward, right? What do we do in 10 years? Will things actually work out the way we want to? What if it doesn't happen that way? What if lots of positive things happen? What do we do then, right? I don't think we should all just like quit once we have achieved some of these goals, right, stay active beyond what maybe we set ourselves up to do. So I feel like, yeah, the flexibility and the open mindset, so more of a way of thinking that can be shared.
Let's jump over to generational divide, if you will, and you've kind of touched on that. I mean, what you've learned from your parents and how there's already kind of that environmental tradition. So we have a fairly large generational divide between our young movement and the older boomers, if you will, that are responsible for climate change. Do you perceive any of that in Germany? What's your perspective on that?
I'm actually not quite sure. I would say from personal views that maybe even though there are different age groups, there are different approaches, that people are working together, acknowledging that there is a community, especially like maybe in the larger areas like Berlin, for example. There are like active communities on that are working together. On the other hand, I would definitely say also on the countryside, we have like the older age group that still like provides small gardening, for example, or does like a really natural lifestyles. It's quite now popular in Germany, especially like with the internet and providing a certain aesthetic around the sustainability in life and how it is more calming. But especially talking about this point, I would definitely repeat the question, like what can America teach us, and what is America teaching us currently, especially with the internet being a great communicator over like borders and oceans and talking abroad. I really think that we can definitely learn on this topic from Americans. Especially Americans, because I like followed the Willow Project. I saw it online, how people reacted and how especially Americans came together overnight and called the White House, wrote letters and like really went feral online, how this could have happened. And with overnight, I mean that in Germany, I would personally say it would maybe take a few days to be that popular, but online it went overnight. The crowd was out of it, and it was really amazing seeing this how quick this happened, and especially other movements as well. I just know that in New York, for example, there happened to be this movement of making the city greener, and locals came together, and within weeks they made seed balls and throw them out of overall in the city and planted trees. And that is something that maybe is happening in Germany as well. But for me, looking at news and knowing about it, I would definitely say that it's only happening like in the bigger places, in the bigger cities. And I really think that is something we could definitely learn from Americans, that there is a more aware sense of unity, and that people are actually reaching out to each other and getting together. And neither the age group, I think there's really a big sense of communication, where I think that is still like a border in Germany, that there's still like, we had it a few minutes ago, that there's still like this hesitant way to new approaches and to changes. And because another German stereotype, we've got the bureaucracy and that really takes up some time. I mean, if we look like at the wind energy, it takes up over 14 folders somehow to like build one engine and set it up. I mean, that's crazy, and takes not only a lot of time to plan, also a lot of money. And coming back to the communal level, on the local level, that definitely is something we need from Americans to get over to Germany and Europe, to like make it more local and reach out to each other, basically.
Yeah. The can-do attitude and the people, the sheer amount of people that are there. Yeah.
I really have the sense that there's not much of a generational divide in Germany, specifically, maybe Europe in general, but that is something we do struggle with here in the United States. Have you interacted with any of the youth movement during your bus tour through the Midwest?
Maybe just to answer your first question again a little bit, just shortly, I feel like being young people that talk about climate change or the climate movements in Germany have obviously been a reaction maybe to the older generation not acting or not stepping up, those who have not done anything so far. So I feel like it is true. I feel like maybe in Europe or in Germany, it is more not as black and white. It's not like the young folks care about the climate and the old ones don't at all. But generally, I feel like it has been it is a frustration that the people that have the possibility or have the capabilities of doing something about it have not done so or still will not do so. And that's, I think, the origin of all of these youth climate movements. That's, hey, the adults, right? We are adults now as well, but like people that are in charge are not doing what maybe they should do. So we are left with no other choice but to step up ourselves and say, hey, wait a minute, this is like, we cannot continue like that. So I feel like that's generally, it is true that there's a big generational divide, but it's maybe not as clear all the time. But ultimately, it is why young people are active and why young people are very much involved in this. And we have been in contact with local groups on the ground here, right? We've been traveling around the Midwest. One of the groups, with several smaller organizations, one of the groups is MN 350. They're based out of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and they're very active in their own community, specifically on climate. Like other groups, even maybe not necessarily just focused on climate change. We've been in contact with organizations in agriculture, farmer organizations, people that maybe can make a difference themselves within their communities rather than local activists. In Kansas City, right, you guys, we've been involved with 2 other groups there as well. And just activists have come to us because we've been out there, we've been publicly wanting contact with people, and they've come up to us. And I've been surprised, and like I already mentioned that I've been very happy almost that people are there and people are doing things. And obviously we are not the first, right? We are sometimes if that happens, we meet a lot of people, young people our age that do something there as well. It feels like we're visitors and we are learning from them. But in other instances, maybe there is nothing that exists there previously, and then we can step in and we can be the messengers of what we're talking about. But you also wanted to add something, I think.
It wasn't a generational divide, if that is, but I mean, we've moved on now. I just wanted to, I agree completely with what you said. I think from the outside, it looks like there's less of a generational divide because we don't have a lot of people who say climate change. We don't have people who deny climate change, I think. And so it looks from the outside, well, everybody's aware of climate change and willing to do something. But as you said, the speed in which people are acting or demanding action is very different. And what they think, what can be done against climate change. I think a lot of the people that younger generations are frustrated with in the older generations, for example, say, oh, we're already doing enough. Look at other countries, they're much worse. Or we just have to wait for the right technology to clean up the air, so we don't really have to change anything about what we're doing. So there's not, like within generations, there's different levels of willingness on how to adapt, I guess. Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us today. Your insights have been very useful. I appreciate your time. Where can our listeners go to learn more about the Heartland Future Bus Tour?
They can go to our website, right? We invite people to go there and just listen to the information or just view our information. We discuss 12 different subjects, all the way from agriculture, transportation to food, physical and mental health as well. And that would be heartlandsfuture.com. That Heartland, like the American Heartland that we're currently traveling through with an S, the future of the Heartland, heartlandsfuture.com. And we invite you to also participate, right? We invite you to participate in person and come and visit us in the several cities that we're still about to go to, as well as participate online and write us a comment, write us some inspiration, say, hey, I'm a local farmer in this community, and I really would like to give my perspective and tell you guys, what can I add to this conversation?
Well, thank you. And thank you to our listeners. We welcome your questions and feedback. You can learn more about the Climate Hour at climatehour.net. That's climatehour.net. This is the Climate Hour. I'm your host, Bob Grove.